Hey, it's good to see you. Good to be back with you again as we kind of wrap up this series about our ability to respond to situations in life, because ultimately our ability to respond determines our responsibility in life and whether or not we respond all the time to things. And yes, we picked on phones because that's the easiest one to do it, but it's really more than just that, but it's also that as well. And our ability to respond appropriately and correctly in many, many circumstances of life is what will ultimately determine how responsible we are. So today I'm excited because we've talked a lot about different things, and this morning I think we're going to bring this together in a way that I think will make a lot of sense to you. So there's this phrase that you may have heard, and that's to whom much is given, much is required. It's kind of a phrase that's been around. To whom something is given, there's something is required about that. And so what we want to look at is, are you taking responsibility for the opportunities that you have in your life, or are you taking them for granted? Or are you excusing your way through life? And we want to look at this because there are plenty of people, and I know you don't believe this, and I know you look around and you think, there are plenty of people that would love to have your opportunities. The problem is you just can't see it. The problem is you can't see that. And so what we want to do is every good thing that comes, we say will come from God, and we want to explore that in some very, very simple and practical ways today. So I want to start with a question that we've asked every week. Every week we've asked the same question. And it's simply this: are you taking responsibility for your life? And everybody answers, well, yeah, obviously. I'm not going to say I'm being irresponsible. But are you really taking responsibility of life? Or are you just saying you're taking responsibility for your life? Because it would be pretty embarrassing to say, no, I'm actually pretty irresponsible right now. Right? I mean, if someone said that to you, you'd be like, what? All right? I mean, thanks for your honesty, but don't, right? I mean, you look, what advice would you give me? I'm being irresponsible. Don't be irresponsible, right? So how do we do this? So one of the things that we began to learn as children is we found out, and I don't know what grade it is, and we all found out at different ages, we all found out at different levels, we all learned at some point that life isn't fair. And we've all tried to figure out, we've responded, well, why didn't this? Well, it's just not fair. Life's not fair. And I've got a little clue here for you. Fairness ended in the Garden of Eden. So that's not new information, right? Life isn't fair is not new information. Fairness ended in the garden. And here's what we want. We only want fair when it looks like our slice of life is smaller than somebody else, right? I don't want fair if it means I get less. I only want fair if it means I get more. True? And so when we begin to look at this fairness of life, it usually means that we're looking at someone else or something else, and it seems inequitable because it seems like our slice is a little bit smaller than their slice, so then there must be something wrong, so I want fairness. But if I look at somebody else and they have less than I have and now I have less, well, I don't want that. That's not fair either. Right? And so usually unfairness means that there's an unevenness in what I see and what I think I should have and what I should have. And what happens is, usually when we see unfair, it usually is a trigger, and we identify something and we use unfairness as an excuse. It will usually produce irresponsibility in us, because an excuse, usually almost 100% of the time, an excuse becomes our gateway to irresponsibility. After all, you kind of think, you have more than you can handle as it is. True? And so you're trying to make it through some decisions that you made prior to this, some things that we talked about sowing and reaping, things that you had done before, and you have to work through this. But here's the thing. Unfairness and irresponsibility should never be our excuse to justify our irresponsibility, right? Because here's what we know. Irresponsibility all by itself takes a toll on our soul. Now, most of the time we talk about it takes a toll on your heart, maybe it takes a toll on your mind and all that kind of stuff. And we don't really talk about the soul a lot, but irresponsibility can take a toll on our soul. And here's how. Our self-respect for ourselves, the respect we have for ourselves, plummets, which leads to self-destructive behavior. And there's just no win there. And so individuals, I think it's fascinating to me. Coaches get all riled up about this. Musicians, band directors, choir directors, drama directors, teachers, bosses, they get all kinds of wound up about this. It's always the students, it seems like, or the musicians or the athletes who it's not been fair for them, and they've been on the wrong end of that. A lot of times their circumstances have been tougher, and they outperform those who have had better circumstances. I mean, if you've ever seen the movie Rudy, that guy had like no opportunities and just worked harder than everybody else. There were other people that were better athletes than him, taller than him, stronger than him. He just outworked everybody. And there's nothing more frustrating to a coach than an athlete who looks like he has been given everything and doesn't work for it, because he goes, why do I? Why do I need to work? I already win. And so there's always this inequity, and people respond differently to the inequity, and that's really what we're going to talk about today. I mean, today in the NFL, there's going to be two quarterbacks playing that neither one of them were big deals in college, right? Neither one. Mahomes, Mitch Trubisky was drafted before Mahomes, for crying out loud, right? And so we look at Mahomes, and now he's going to be a superstar. And then we look at Joe Burrow, who went through a couple different colleges, was not highly recruited. Even his senior year when he won a national championship, he wasn't even in the Heisman. He was like dead last in the Heisman vote. And then he just outworked and outperformed. Coaches love that. But what's even better is when you have high achievement or high possibility and high work ethic. But a lot of times that doesn't happen. And we're going to look at that today. But we are going to acknowledge that life isn't fair, and opportunities aren't fair either. And fair is really not the issue here. I mean, fair isn't the issue. What we want to talk about is how we respond, not how we can make things fair. It's not fair. Okay, great. Here's what you get to control, not fairness. You get to control your response. So how am I going to respond? Because you're responsible not for fairness, you're responsible for your response. And so when we look at this whole series and we look at this whole word called respondability, being responsible is how do we respond appropriately when there aren't things that are fair, or there seems to be things that just don't seem right, and we don't know what's going on with us. Because here's what I know about you, because it's true about me. We don't get to choose our opportunities. But we always get to choose how we respond to them. And so Jesus kind of knew what he was talking about. And even if you're like, I don't know if I buy into the whole Jesus thing, this is something you're going to want to sink your teeth into, because what Jesus teaches in this lesson that we're going to look at today in Matthew is brilliant. And I want to do my best to be responsible with his teaching so that we all can walk away here and go, man, Jesus, wow. Not only did he just die for my sins so that I don't have to go to hell and that I can live in heaven, but it's so much more than that, because he's offering me a way to live and to respond differently, which will ultimately change the trajectory, not just of my eternity, but also the way that I live here. And so Matthew records a series of parables that are like, hey, the kingdom of heaven is going to be like this. In God's system, God's economy, it's different than the way that you lived, which most of you would say, well, that's fantastic news, because, man, sometimes the work in the world that I live in is just tough. And so he addresses responsibility directly, head on. He goes right at it about the unevenness and the inequity that's involved in life and how we have a responsibility to respond to this. So in Matthew chapter 25, and I want to look here together here today, Jesus tells this lesson, this story. It's a parable, which means it could have been true. It's not true. It's just a story that could have been true that is used as an illustration to make a great teaching point. And that's what he does. So in Matthew chapter 25, we're going to start at verse 14. And in just a minute, what I'm going to need you to do, I want you to read on the screen, or if you brought your Bibles, you can read them, that's fine. But I'm going to ask you to do something that you may never hear me do again, so pay attention. I'm going to need you to get out your phone in just a second. I know. And I'm going to need you to find the calculator app in just a minute. But first, let's see how this starts. Again, Jesus, again, meaning I'm going to tell you about what the kingdom of heaven is like. Again, I'm going to explain it to you one other time and in another way what the kingdom is like. And he says it's going to be like a man who's going on a journey, who called for his servants. Now, when you hear servants, you're thinking slaves, and immediately when you think slaves, you think Civil War. Not even close to what this is like. These are like workers, minimum wage workers, who called his servants and he entrusted his wealth. He's getting ready to go on vacation. I mean, it's like you're going on vacation and you put your dog in a kennel. This guy's going on vacation and he's putting his money somewhere. And I know what you're thinking. Ooh, I ain't sitting your dog. I'll sit your money, right? And that's exactly what he's saying. And so he entrusted his wealth to them. And this is where things just kind of get crazy. To one guy, to one servant, he gives 5 bags of gold. 5 bags. So we got a 5-bagger, and then another he gives 2 bags, so we got a 2-bagger, and then we have another 1 bag, and he gave them according to their ability, their natural ability. And now, here's what ability means here. The way that he's seen these workers work before. So here's the thing. Your reputation at work is preceded by how you did last week, last month, last year, last quarter. And this manager, he says, I'm looking at how they've done, how they've performed in the past. Literally, what we're talking about here is a talent of gold. Now, this is where you need to get your calculators out now, okay? Because we're going to do some math together. And I know for some of you, you hated story problems in math, and others of you loved them. Well, just tolerate them today with me, okay? Just for sake. I'm going to get my phone out too, and I'm going to pull up my calculator just so that we get these numbers right, and we're going to check each other's math. So if you're like, is there a test? Well, we'll make sure we all check each other's math. You'll be all right, okay? Reduce your test anxiety for just a hot second, okay? Here we go. So a talent, one way we can interpret talent is 20 years worth of wages. So some of you probably just got your W-2, your 1099, probably came in the mail this week. If not, it'll come next week. And if you got your 1099, I want you to think about that number and multiply it by 20. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. Right now, there's some, $15 an hour is pretty standard. That's kind of the new minimum wage, depending on how you look at it. And 40-hour work week, and if you multiply that times 52, so I'm looking at about a minimum of $31,000 a year. But the average right now is about $36,000 a year. Is the average American worker right now, $36,000 a year. And if you multiply that by 20, I'm looking at about $750,000. Now when you looked at your W-2 and what you have and you multiplied it, what you made this past year and you multiplied it by 20, you're probably making more than that. All right, but on average, let's just call it $750,000 to $1 million as to how much money we have in like the 1-bagger, right? So he has that. So now let's look at this a little different. There's also the argument could be made that this is a weight. So a talent, we measured gold in troy. They would measure it in talent. And so how they would measure it back then is for Romans, in the Roman time, it was about the equivalent. 1 talent was about 71 pounds and 3 ounces of gold. 71 and 3 ounces. Now the average Roman talent used for construction purposes was 75 pounds. And then we see in 1 Samuel where David had a crown that was made out of 1 talent of gold. So we're talking a 75-pound crown. He didn't wear that one a lot. I'm guessing that one probably was on the shelf for people to come in and be like, yep, I'm the king. So let's go with that for argument's sake, and this one's going to be a little bit, let's say 75 pounds of gold is a talent, okay? So for reference, a bar of gold that you've never touched, but you may have Googled a bar of gold. Gold is about 27 pounds a bar. So we're looking at 3 bars of gold is 1 talent. So let's just get out our calculators right now, okay? I need you to put in this number, 1,835. That's right now the price of gold per ounce. Anybody know how many ounces are in a pound? 16, okay? So let's multiply that times 16. Then we're going to multiply that times 75 for 75 pounds. I got about 2.2 mil. Thank you, Matt. So 2.2 mil is a little bit more than we can, 1 bag of gold is a little bit more cash. If we had $100 bills, that's a little bit more than we can fit in bag 1. Okay? A briefcase of $100 bill cash can sometimes get close to $2 million, depending on how much money we're dealing with here, okay? So just as a reference point, we're dealing with in the neighborhood of $750,000 to $2 million in 1 bag. in today's market. We're doubling that for bag number 2, according to what he has said. And then the 5-bagger, we're somewhere in the neighborhood of $4 to $11 million cash in these bags. So I was carrying these bags in here this morning, and one I borrowed, and I was bringing some in, and they're like, whoa, you got drug deal money in there? Somebody said it's a joke, and I was like, ha, 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 that won't be funny later for you, but okay. So here's the thing that we know, right? When we're talking about this, we're talking $1 million, $1.5 million. Are you comfortable with that? Well, maybe $2 to $3 million here, and maybe north of $10 million cash that is handed from the servant to the master. And this is what he says: I'm going on a journey, and I need you to look after my money for me. So he goes on his journey. Are we ready to go back to the Bible now that we have context? We have a 1-bagger, over $1 million, almost 3, maybe 10, maybe. Conservative, we're at least at 5 on the end. $5 million, today's money. Okay, ready? Let's go to verse 16. We're making our way. We're just cruising through this morning, aren't we? The man who had received 5 bags, he's a 5-bagger. You got to pay extra for that one at the airport too, FYI, right? 5-bagger. He at once put his money to work, and he gained 5 bags more. Now here's what the master knew. He expected that, because that's what that servant had been doing all along. He'd been showing up early, staying late. He was a go-getter. He would get after it. Because remember we talked about from week 1, responsible people, don't you love working with, and don't you love working for, and don't you love having employees who are responsible underneath you, because they don't take a lot of work. I mean, you just wind them up and let them go, right? The ones that drive you crazy are the, hello, we're going to have a pulse today? You here? Hello? And they excuse, and they excuse, and they excuse. But when you have a responsible employee, you're just like, here, go get it. Go. Tear after it. And so the master already knew this. This isn't like, oh my word, you doubled it. You doubled my money. He's not shocked by this. He expected that. He knew that's what was going to happen. Verse 17. So also the one with 2 bags of gold, so 2 to 3 mil, gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag, just a cool $1.5 million, 2 maybe, went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money, which the implication is he did nothing. We could look at this and go, yeah, but he wasn't given as much as those. Okay. If this was loaded with pictures of Benjamin Franklin, $100 bills, and I hand that to you, you don't know what anybody else is getting. Are you mad? He did nothing. So, after a long time, verse 19, after a long time, the master of those servants returned, and they settled accounts. Settled accounts meaning, this is an unbelievable opportunity, right? And so, verse 20, the man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5, and he said, Master, he said, you've entrusted me. You said that I had the ability to do stuff with this. You entrusted me with 5 bags of gold, and while you were gone, the market got hot. I don't know what happened. Doesn't matter. While you were gone, I've gained 5 more. His master replied, his boss replied, and obviously wouldn't you, if you were his boss, you'd be like, well done. All right, thank you. Well done, good and faithful servant. This is where that phrase comes from. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful, and you can substitute another word here. You have been responsible with a few things. Now I'm going, few things? You've been responsible with a few things. I'm going to now put you handled 5 mil, 10 mil, whatever it is. You handled it so well. Now I'm really going to help you and I'm going to give you many things, to which you're like, so why don't you come and share in your master's happiness? The man with 2 bags of gold came also. Master, he said, you've entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. And he says, see, I've gained 2 more. And his master responds the same. You have done really well, you good and faithful, you responsible servant. You have responded well with your abilities. You've responded so well with your abilities. I'm going to put you in charge of a few things. And why don't you come and share in your master's happiness? And it gets the exact same response. They had different levels of responsibility, but they handled them the same. Their response was the same, and they both shared in the master's happiness. Then things go sideways. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came and he said, Master, I know that you're a hard man, which means you scare me to death. You ever had a boss like that? You're just terrified. No matter what you do, you're going to do it wrong. So you're just like, man, what's the point? And he says, I know that you're a man that sometimes you harvest, you gather in places that you didn't even sow, and gathering where you didn't even scatter seed. Basically, you're so focused on winning, you don't even care the consequences. He said, so I was afraid. Afraid of what? Nervous I would lose it. And I went out and I hid your gold in the ground. See, here you go. It's all there. You can count it. It all belongs to you. And essentially, I didn't do anything with the opportunity or the stewardship that you gave me. And his master replied, you wicked, and we can respond to wicked to the term worthless, little value, and lazy servant. He wasn't afraid. Let's be real clear on here. He wasn't afraid. He was lazy. He didn't do anything bad. And isn't this the key to laziness? Laziness. What? I didn't do anything bad. What? He just didn't do anything. Yeah, which isn't bad. I didn't get in trouble. I was just sitting here all day. I didn't do anything bad. He goes, yeah, but you've been lazy. You didn't do anything. And you knew that there was going to be a time of harvest, but you didn't even sow anything. You didn't even plant anything. You didn't even scatter seed. You didn't even try. All you've done is you've made an excuse. Well, let's keep going. This is a happy story. Verse 27. He goes, well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers. Right? Even if you'd have walked it to the bank, at least I would have gained interest on this. But you were too lazy and you were too irresponsible even to take my bag to the bank. You stuck it in the ground. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who now has 10 bags. We're going that way. And the response here is, you are not fair. That's not fair. Because when you get into excuse mode in your life, it's very difficult to get out. And everything in your life is somebody else's fault. Verse 29. For those who have been given more, and they will have an abundance. As for those who do not have, even what they have may be taken from them, and throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. He's still in the parable. Now, this story, if you're wondering if this is an investment story, it's not. This has nothing to do with finances. It has everything to do with your life. This has nothing to do with the price of gold or how many cash dollars we can actually, by the way, there is no cash in any of these. One of them has pillow. So if you're like, ooh, I want to get my hands on that bag. Okay, but it's a pillow. All right? Has nothing to do with money. Has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with what is your ability to respond to what has been given to you? Because most people don't value what's been given to them, and they don't see it the way that God sees it. and they end up squandering it, or they're lazy, or they're irresponsible. And so it's really tempting with this story to make more of the story than there really is. Because it has to do everything with our ability to respond to what we've been given, which converts to responsibility. And there's a lesson about being responsible even in uneven situations, in uneven circumstances. And if you're making the case, well, it's not fair, I'm going to go, yep, that ain't the point of the story, is it? Has nothing to do with it. It's a lesson about how can we be responsible even when the opportunities are not equal and they're not even. It's a reminder that there's an opportunity for every one of us, no matter where we are, to be responsible with what we have been given. So, here's what we know. Some of you have been given 5-bag opportunities. What's a 5-bag opportunity? I'm going to be as simple and gentle as I can. These are people that have good IQs, born well, connected, probably has a good education, maybe even inheritance, influence. These people probably didn't have school debt when they left college. They probably had those things and they were given to them and they have the ability to kind of tempt them. Now, here's the thing. 5-bag people, they can do awesome things in the world, but they have a dark side, and this is simply this. They tend to sometimes, they can often be irresponsible because so much has come easy for them. And sometimes they don't try as hard. Now, in the parable, they did. And usually, first generation, the people that get to 5 bags, they're the responsible ones. But when it gets handed down to their kids, it often turns sideways and Excuseville shows up. But these people have had everything handed to them. These are the people you've loved to hate, right? They're athletic, they were attractive, they were musical, they just had it all. And they've been given 5 bags. But the temptation for you is that you're going to be lazy. Because here's the thought process behind it, is you go, it'll be all right. It'll work out. Why? Because it's always worked out. I got 5 bags of gold. Are you kidding me? It'll work out. Don't stress out about it. It means you need to have, if you've been given 5 bags, it means you need to have a greater responsibility, not less. That's not easy street. That's not the way your Heavenly Father looks at it. Well, this is great. I don't have to do as much because my college is paid for. What? I don't have to do as much because I have so much money because my parents died and I inherited so much. Your Heavenly Father goes, wait, that's not an excuse to do less. This is a responsibility that you're required to do more. Now, through the years, I've met people that it's dawned on them early, and I had a friend in South Carolina who retired early, and he was born here and moved there. He kept multiplying the money. He retired early and has put over 200 wells in Haiti, partnered with him on some of those things. He was responsible with the master's money. Now, let's look at briefcase 1. This may mean you came from a broken home, right? And your parent you lived with was really struggling, and you had college debt out the yin-yang, and you have debt in general that's drowning, and your car payment and mortgage payment and all this. School is challenging, jobless, single again. Now here's the thing. Your temptation is not going to be lazy. Your temptation is going to be to make excuses because it hasn't been fair. I think one of the greatest examples of people who were 1-baggers is Ben Carson. That guy. You didn't hear him make excuses. Presidential candidate, ended up being on a presidential cabinet. It's a great story. Surgeon, doctor. But here's the most important verse of the parable. And I want to read this, and we'll wrap this up because it's just awkward in here right now, isn't it? You feel that? I feel it. Not my story. I'm just reading it. Verse 19. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. And this is where, if you're a Christian, this is where all the implications for your life, not your money, I don't care about it. This is about your life. Christians believe that if you're a Christian, you need to know that we believe you have to give an account for your life, on how you've lived your life and how you've been responsible and your ability to respond to it. And so for the industrious servants, it was get to it. They could not wait. And for the lazy servants, their response is, do I have to? Seriously, do I have to? And those responses literally reflect our ability to respond. So regardless of where you are on the spectrum, that's irrelevant. Take responsibility and refuse to make excuses. Some of you have got to get after it about your excuses. You have to refuse to make excuses. Benjamin Franklin, who ironically enough is on the $100 bill, which is in none of these bags, but we've imagined him to be there in great quantity. He said this, "He that is good at making excuses is seldom good at anything." I think that's true. So for those of you who have big opportunities, big dreams, big goals, don't take them for granted. Those have been gifted to you as stewardship. And for those of you who feel like you have less opportunities, don't be lazy. Because we've all been given some time and we've all been given opportunities. Let's do something with them. Let's improve our ability to respond to what's been given. Because to whom much has been given, unless you're willing to turn your nose up at 1,000,000, to whom much has been given, which is all of us, much responsibility is required. So let's take responsibility for our lives. So as we close today, I'm gonna pray here in just a second. The band's getting ready to sing. There are some crosses around the room, and there's paper in the back of your seats, and maybe you want to write a prayer request. Maybe today you just need to be like, I need to stop making this excuse, or I need to stop being lazy about this, or I need to realize this is the opportunities I've been given. And all I've been able to see is what I didn't have. I mean, all I can see is from here and being like, well, I'm good. I got more than they do. I'm good. And maybe all you've been able to see is what everybody else has. And you can't even see the opportunities in front of you because all you see is, well, look what they get to do. Well, how come they get to do that? Why are they that way? And you're so consumed by somebody else's bag that you have lost sight. And we all do this. We all lose sight. This is your moment to focus. To focus on what God has given you, not what God has given someone else, because you're going to be responsible for you, not them. And so today, maybe you just need to write that and you need to pin it to the cross. Don't put your name on it, just pin it to the cross and say, God, I need help, and today is the day that I want to start improving my ability to respond to you with the life you've given me. Maybe you want to take communion and just remember what God has done for you, or maybe you want to light a candle because you're just in a dark place right now. And you're saying, Jesus, I need light in this. I need light in this relationship. I need light in this job. I need light in me. God, come help me. Or maybe you need someone to pray with you today, and there'll be people in the back for that. But for now, they're going to sing 2 songs, and you're going to have an opportunity to respond. So can I just pray with you quickly? God, this morning, this isn't about money. It's about our lives. Way more valuable than money. And you've given us a lot to be responsible for. So would you help us to respond to you and stop looking around at what everybody else has and either making an excuse to be lazy or just making excuses? But would you help us to get to work with what you've given us so that we can share in the Master's blessings? It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for joining us this week. If this was your first time, we'd love to invite you to text the word GP guest to the number 97000. It was great having you with us, and we look forward to seeing you next week.